Imagine a world where instead of the people turning on Captain America when he stood up for their freedom, they asked him to step up and save them. If you read Civil War or even just watched the film, you might remember that while some of the heroes sided with Captain America's belief that heroes should be able to save the public without revealing their personal identities and endangering their loved ones, that the public at large, the little guy, were tired of vigilantism. They were tired of their cities being trampled by superheroes and supervillains. In the end, they just wanted the fighting to stop. And at the end of that story, Cap surrendered, realizing that the people didn't want him to fight for their freedom if it meant a lack of safety. And then he was assassinated. But what if he had lived? What if he had the super soldier serum removed from his body? What if years later, the little guy realized the value of having a symbol, of having unregulated heroism after suffering under the boot of the government and the illusions fed to the people by the legacy media? In a nutshell, that story is Avengers Twilight. But is seeing the potential for Steve to get his due in a story, for him to be a hero in this type of story again, enough? Or is it too little too late? This story, while on the surface, seems incredibly appealing to a Captain America fan like myself. It's also ridiculously derivative. Hear me out. Imagine a world where a large group of villains with the right direction are able to defeat the heroes, leaving icons like Captain America to simply accept the dystopian world that he's lived in. Well, unlike Old Man Logan, in this world, the villains ultimately lost, but so did the heroes. Imagine a world where people are calling for the return of an old icon as the heroes of the day. Among them, the descendants of those greats have turned from heroism towards authoritarianism. Imagine a world where the younger generation's lack of knowledge of their own history leads them to not only insult their ancestors, but the very notion of heroism, while propping up villains in their confident ignorance. Imagine a world where the authoritative news sources can't be trusted, as rather than informing the public with the truth, they are solely interested in keeping the show rolling, so much so that they will feed people outright propaganda. It's in this world that we are introduced to a version of Steve Rogers who is old and out of shape as a result of having the super soldier serum quote-unquote taken from him. But he is happily married to a doctor named Rosa, he volunteers at soup kitchens, and he meets Matt Murdock and Luke Cage for coffee on occasion. But this is a Captain America that's never been so out of touch. Combine that with the fact that he has had to watch as more and more freedoms are taken away from the American people, as the toxic symbiosis between corporations, government, and legacy media have been taken to their natural conclusion when you remove the people's ability to fight back, which is a totalitarian state. Now, America in this world is more prosperous than ever, and yet people are arrested for breaching curfew, they're arrested for taking their own photos or videos as a result of the Watcher Act. This is basically a combination of the dystopian worlds of George Orwell's 1984 and Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. On the one hand, you have the obvious authoritarian practices, and on the other, life is so comfortable and easy, and the people are so detached from a time of struggle and hardship that a documentary about the Red Skull actually being a hero could even be considered credible. Steve tried to curb the rise of authoritarianism in this world by running for Senate, but the people didn't vote for him. And given that they still live under the authoritarian rule, he took that to mean that they wanted everything that the country is experiencing. But after seeing an ad for the Red Skull documentary, and after appearing in an interview with James Stark, the son of Tony and Janet Van Dyne, where James denounces the former heroes and brings up H-Day, the day in which Ultron enhanced a number of villains and Boston was destroyed, James manages to blame the Avengers, given that Hank Pym created Ultron and that Hulk was mind-controlled into aiding the villains. James is also running the new version of the Avengers, which are possibly clones of the originals or genetically engineered copies. He runs Stark Technology and gets ideas from the brain and partial body of his father that's being contained in the Raft prison, ready to use whenever he needs new ideas. James Stark represents the corporations in the toxic triumvirate that's controlling the country. And so with all this stuff, Steve has had nearly enough. But he's also old and out of shape, as I mentioned. He gets heart arrhythmias when he's too stressed out, so he tries to keep his head down. However, that doesn't stop him from stepping in to save some kids from a S.H.I.E.L.D. patrol. He's almost beaten to death himself when he ends up being rescued by the Defenders, which in this universe are a non-powered underground revolution led by Luke Cage. Now, Luke Cage is old, and his bulletproof skin over time hardened so much that he's actually nearly immobile. but he makes up for it by being the somewhat leader of this group and providing intel and wisdom from his days as a hero. Well, Luke has decided that it was time for the return of an iconic symbol. Matt Murdock had been killed that day, and the Defenders had a Vita Ray machine and the Super Soldier Serum. He offers it to Steve, and Steve once again becomes Captain America. Now, I also feel like I have to mention that an old hero wanting to stop the authoritarian government with a return of the Super Soldier Serum is also a big plot line from the Old Man Logan universe. On its face, this is like a Clint Eastwood-looking Steve Rogers taking the opportunity to show this dystopian future what good old-fashioned freedom looks like. But there's nothing original about the story, and I don't mean in a general fiction sense. I mean Chip Zdarsky very unsubtly spliced together plot points from popular stories in Marvel and DC Comics. And the problem is that Chip Zdarsky isn't talented enough to do it well. Specifically, I don't think that he does a good job of convincing we, the audience, to care about the circumstances of the story. Feel free to leave your comments or criticism in the comment section, but in my opinion, too much of the driving force behind Steve deciding to make a change, to stop turning the other cheek, is told to us and not shown. There is evidence of some things like the Watcher program, like people being beaten by S.H.I.E.L.D. However, we know that Steve, Luke, and Matt have been living in this world as it is for a while, so those things alone couldn't have been the catalyst. But it seems like the straw that broke the camel's back is something that happened off-panel. Almost as a throwaway line, Luke mentions that Matt Murdock died. The evidence of the government's abuses that's shown in a physical picture handed to Steve is something that we don't get to see. We're just left to assume that the really bad stuff happened, but we don't get to see it happen, and especially don't get to see it happen to the prospective characters, and so it doesn't seem as personal. I'm not saying that Chip Zdarsky needs to hold the reader's hand to explain all this to us, but there's a difference between the audience knowing what is going on and caring about it. And I think that there's a connection missing. Yes, Steve Rogers is sick of this world, but going from one day where he's kissing his wife in the morning and having coffee with his friends to the next day deciding to be Captain America again, we're just left to assume too much. We're left to make up our own reasons for why Cap takes on the mantle. Outside of this being a very derivative story, I think Chip Zdarsky mainly just needed to take more time. We didn't need to be fully reintroduced to these characters, but we needed a more in-depth explanation of the world, enough for us to understand why the circumstances that these characters live with every day are tolerable one day and unforgivable the next. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. I think I'll continue to cover this series as it's only 4 or 5 issues, unless it gets really boring somehow, which I don't think it'll happen. This isn't one of those stories where it's just nothing of interest is happening and it's just a story that's there. There is some interesting things. Having the theme of the old hero coming back to save the new world is something that's always appealed to me. I'm a big Captain America fan. I just think that Chip Zdarsky either didn't add enough depth to this universe, or he wasn't willing to get into the more visceral and intimate things that would make us as the reader really connect to it and say, yeah, we're rooting for Captain America. He needed to return and, change the world. But if you enjoyed this video, I would appreciate it if you would hit that like and subscribe button, as well as the notification bell so that you never miss out on a new video. Thanks for watching.